One of the things I learned during the floodings we had earlier this month is people have absolutely no clue how to take care of their home. So what if there's a real crisis, not just this monetary stuff? Well, I mean, what do I think, right? I mean, we have a mess out there, but we do also have policymakers that are excellent at kicking the can down the road. And so what I do know is that you'll have a job because we'll have something to worry about for an extended period. The reason we listen to the Fed is because the Fed controls a big bazooka. So that's why we care. Now, I think we all agree on that. The second portion, though, already, with you iterating all this, and that's why I cynically put in there that you think that Powell has this under control, all of what you're saying somehow suggests that Powell has a good framework. He's not going to do this until inflation is under control and this and that. And I think that is where I have the biggest issue. And I'll talk about the rest of what you say in a moment, but Powell does not have a framework that's decent, no matter how you look at it. When a higher for longer is not a framework, it's not a strategy. He can, of course, hike rates, and he can wait for inflation to maybe come down, but there is no coherent framework. Larry Summers said, in order to get out of high inflation, you need a new framework. You need a strategy. And what it means where the Powell should go. Once you have high inflation, it becomes volatile. It becomes jumpy. And by all means, the year-over-year comparisons are getting better. And so odds are that for the coming months, the inflation readings are going to be okay. No guarantee of that, but that's all right. But then what, right? What is he going to do? And so I just put that out there, that creates an inherent instability. So that's number two. They are tactical rather than strategic, might be a nice way of phrasing it. Reaction mode is also still very polite. It's more than that, though, because markets function better when you know what the bazooka is going to do. I don't want to really use the word loose cannon because that's not exactly what he is, but there needs to be a plan of how he's going to use the bazooka. What you see is what you get. And so now I don't like what the Fed is doing. Well, who cares, right? What matters is what the Fed does. So what the Fed has said is going to do is they're going to be higher for longer. And that's precisely what they're going to do. And they're going to do this. When inflation comes down, it's going to be okay. But he doesn't want to be another Arthur Burns. Arthur Burns was the Fed president of the early 70s, and we have to thank for, in part at least, for stagflation. And so he wants to be higher for longer. And that means he wants to have an excuse to pause. The excuse to pause is, on the one hand, no jobs reports that are out of whack on the upside, and inflation reports that are in line. And so when we spoke last, I said, well, my expectation is we're going to pause in May. That's because the year-over-year comparisons are going to look somewhat decent for the first quarter. And then in May, they're going to say, all right, we'll do, and we wait. Now, we had on last Friday, we had jobs report that we can talk about as to the details, but the short of it, it was much stronger than most people had expected. And so that says, my God, we can't do it. And by the end of that day, it took several hours, the market priced in that indeed we'll get another rate hike in June as well. So then we get another rate hike. And so now we're there. And so now we're going to wait again until the next data point comes in. If the next inflation report is benign, it's not going to change much. If the next jobs report, the GDP report is very bad, we might take that second rate hike off the table again. And that's just how it's going to be. Now, the third point, though, that you raise, and where I strongly disagree with you, if what you have implied, you indicated about the delayed impact that the Fed action has. Well, you need a framework to assert that. And instead of saying he is fully aware of the delayed impact, no, what you got to listen for is the delayed impact is code for I'm just about done hiking rates. But it's not the same thing as having a strategy. So very different from Canada, where Tim Macklem, the head of the Bank of Canada, he said, all right, I've done my job for now, I'll wait now. Because indeed, I mean, it's absolutely correct, of course, that Fed policy acts with a long and variable rate. Indeed, if you looked at the Taylor rule, we would be having rate cuts right now. Now, we would have them from far, far higher levels. But what you expected to see is that with the current Fed that we have, okay, we'll hike rates. And then once he thinks we can wait, Then he'll say, suddenly it's going to act with a lag, right? But of course, it's acting with a lag already. And the only thing what he did last week is he alluded to that because he was on that bandwagon. All right, we'll do one more rate hike and then we'll pause. Although he had talked about rate hikes in plural throughout much of his speech, but the market didn't take it seriously. And it didn't take it seriously because of just everything else that's been saying. It's only now after jobs report that was through the roof, and we should talk about that a little bit, that the market adjusted to it and may have another rate hike. And so ultimately, right, we may not like what the Fed is doing, but the Fed has the bazooka, and that's why we listen to every word he says, because, hey, did he happen to pull the trigger? Ultimately, though, he said what he's going to do. So if we have strong economic numbers, the reason he doesn't like strong economic numbers is because if you have 2 job openings for every job seeker, the theory is that that's inflationary. Not everybody agrees to that. And of course, the post-pandemic environment is a bit all over the place, but that gets him to want to be tighter. Some people, by the way, talk about that we're not going to have a recession at all. We can somehow sail through this. That doesn't jive with any of this because the tougher you are, and then you have that lag with which the Fed policy acts, it's in my view all but impossible to not get into recession territory. I mean, it's many times, and he used those words again. Now, the one when the market dipped after during Powell's speech, when he talked about these strong economic numbers might tend to be higher for longer. He didn't use exactly those words, but and so a lot of that is, of course, the market. The media just interpreting into what the market is doing. And maybe there are some bots that trade right away on any syllable that he says. Ultimately, what matters is what is he going to do? And there, by the way, the other thing to keep in mind is the folks voting at the Fed, and a certain numbers are there each month. But then there are several people that rotate on a yearly basis. We have a far more dovish composition at the Fed this year versus last year. And so he's going to get more pushback against these rate hikes as they come along. Now, clearly, if you have more than 500,000 jobs created each month, they all can say, well, it's all right. We're not going to cause too much damage if we hike further. But I wouldn't be surprised if the economic data are going to be quite mixed, which means those dissenting voices are going to get louder. And that's going to make the messaging more difficult. By the way, one of the things that Powell had lamented is that the market doesn't take him seriously, right? Well, part of it is, and the market is somehow so much faster in absorbing information. Well, maybe the market is a little bit faster, but the key thing that has changed is forward guidance. So when the Fed finally decided to hike rates, they said everything they're going to do over the next 12 months or whatever it was. And guess what? If you do that, the market is going to price it in. With some skepticism, but for the most part.